You're listening
to the CD Baby DIY
Musician
Podcast.
Hey there, and welcome to episode number 115 of the CD Baby DIY Musician Podcast. My name is Kevin Bruner, your host for the show. And on this edition of the podcast, you're going to hear from Kristin Thomson. Kristin is from the Future of Music Coalition, an organization that works to make sure that the interests of artists and musicians are properly represented as new policy and laws are created. With so much change in the music industry, the Future Music Coalition has embarked on an ambitious survey to collect hard data about how artists and musicians are making money. Why are they doing this? Well, I'll let Kristin explain. Let's get to my interview. Well, joining me on the line is Kristin Thomson of the Future of Music Coalition. Kristin, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing well. Last time we talked, we discussed the subject of radio. And now we're having you back on the podcast because the Future of Music Coalition is getting ready to launch a research project to understand how musicians are really making their money. But before we get into that, because there's lots of details about why you're doing the survey and what the project is all about, why don't you give us a little background about yourself and the Future Music Coalition, just in case our listeners didn't hear your first interview we did like a year ago.
Sure. Future Music Coalition is a national nonprofit organization. We advocate for musicians. It could be musicians who are members of CD Baby, or it could be folks who are signed to major labels. But it doesn't really matter, just because we want to make sure that all musicians are represented and considered stakeholders in the conversations that are happening, the licensing deals that are occurring, the things that are emerging as we move through this transformation to a more digital landscape. So FMC works in three big programmatic areas. We do advocacy for musicians and a range of issues from radio consolidation to spectrum reform and webcasting rates. We also do a lot of education. We organize events, and in fact, we're coming up on our 11th annual Future of Music Policy Summit in Washington, D.C. And finally, we do some research, and we've done research on the effects of radio consolidation, on whether payola has been an issue, on how musicians get played on the radio, and we're currently in a very large multi-stage project called Artist Revenue Streams. Myself, I've been a musician for the past 20 years, but only sort of as a part-time fun thing. In the 1990s, I was in a band called Tsunami that toured a lot, and we put out our own records on our label called Simple Machines. And Simple Machines was also very busy putting out records from other bands and artists that we really liked. It was based in the Washington, D.C. area, and we put out about 70 records over an 8-year period. One of the interesting things about Simple Machines, in fact, some of the reason that the Future of Music Coalition operates and exists the way it does is something we put out called The Mechanic's Guide to Putting Out Records, Cassettes, and CDs, which was a handbook. It was like 24 pages long about, how can your average musician put out a record? How does it work? Where do you get a 7-inch made? Where can you get something? What does mastering mean for a CD? And it's something that I know CD Baby is wonderful at transferring and telling musicians about. So it all goes along with sort of DIY spirit and also ensuring that musicians don't reinvent the wheel by sharing important information.
You guys do a lot of lawmaking groups and people that have their hands in adjusting legislation as it pertains to digital music and how things move in the future, correct?
Yeah, FMC, we're part of a group of folks that advocate for musicians and songwriters and composers on the broadest scale. Sometimes it's about what happens at the Copyright Office, maybe filing documents saying what we think rates should be or how they should be calculated or how they should be paid out. Sometimes it's work at the Federal Communications Commission. Sometimes it's legislative issues at Congress itself. And then there's other agencies as well that have somewhat of a role to play in how musicians are compensated, how they're heard on the air. It's sort of a fascinating and complex world that we're in. And sometimes even what's going on in the Spectrum world or whether AT&T should merge with T-Mobile is an important part of the equation about how musicians are going to get heard and paid in the future.
Yes, and it seems to be getting more complex year by year.
Yeah.
So tell us about this project and how it came about and what you guys are hoping to accomplish.
Sure. It's called Artist Revenue Streams. And the basic question is, how are today's musicians and composers earning a living? And how has that changed over time? Has technology had an impact on the types of revenue streams musicians are relying on? Has the ratio changed amongst different streams? For example, just to throw it out there, are people making more or less money on physical music sales of some recorded music? Are they making more or less on merchandise? There's a lot of different things to look at. We also want to make sure we recognize and examine the differences from genre to genre. So this isn't just about, say, rock musicians or singer-songwriters. We want to know what it's like for a hip-hop person or a Nashville songwriter or somebody who works in jazz or classical. So for us, we are trying to be multi-genre and also multi-role because there's a big difference. And sometimes we forget about this, that we all think, everyone's making money on playing shows or something like that. But for copyright law treats the musical composition, which is the underlying lyrics and musical notes of a song, very differently from the performance of the musical composition. And everyone's brain is sort of already churning away at what that difference might be. But think about it this way. So for lots of us who are musicians, we're like, we compose our own music and we play a show. So we are both the composer and the performer. And sometimes we're also the person that records it, so we're the recording artist too. But for some people, the distinction is really real. So think about a Nashville songwriter that just writes songs for somebody else to sing or perform. So they never perform their own songs. That still exists. Then there's people who are perhaps a salaried member of an orchestra. So they're playing repertoire. They're playing classical composers, and they're paid for their performances. And then there's people who are session musicians who, are in the studio as hired guns. They're, asked to perform whatever is going on in the studio or on the road, and they're paid for their time and for their skill. And they usually don't have any sort of rights or associated, they don't get any money for the copyrights or something like that. They're just paid for their time. So for some folks, there's this real distinction. So as we set up Artist Revenue Streams project, we wanted to make sure we recognize those distinctions and be able to capture information and data from all different sources, both cross-genre and cross-role.
Yeah, and I think that's important because, just kicking around the discussion in the office, it's a lot of people can just kind of jokingly say, well, artists aren't making money. But for what you guys are trying to do, it's very important to kind of get some hard data around all of those things, because a lot of musicians, some of them teach lessons, some of them, play in the studio, like you mentioned, but a lot of them, when an artist really thinks about it, they might be doing 5-10 different things to generate revenue for themselves. And it's important that those things get represented properly when especially when laws are written. Absolutely,
and it's really there's also been a lot of assumptions made. As technology has changed, especially in the past 10 years, with so many developments in the music and technology field. If we think back, it was only 10 years ago that Napster appeared, the original Napster. But then since then, there's been the iTunes Music Store, which is a remarkable change in the way that musicians and fans, the way that music can be sold. Then there's satellite radio, there's Pandora, there's tons of social media. There's now all these hybrids like Turntable FM or music subscription services or Last FM. There's so many different ways that music fans can engage with or listen to or stream or purchase music that it's incredibly complicated, and to most musicians it's just maybe it's one check from CD Baby, but there might be multiple things inside their check from CD Baby that are different revenue streams based on the roles they play and the way copyright law treats all these different interactions with fans. So we just are trying to make sure that we embrace the distinction, so we can sort of pull apart the differences and see how things are increasing or decreasing over time, and how technology has affected things.
Yeah, and I think also why getting some hard data straight from the musicians is incredibly helpful. It's very easy with the way the media works to assume something is popular and working, or it could be the latest craze for a couple months and everyone's talking about it. And so I think the general public can assume things, oh, well, the artists are now all making their money on Spotify, and not really understand, well, what that means. Anything, first of all, if that's a reality, if that's true that artists are making money off Spotify, or if it's sustainable, or if it's anything there more than just being the latest buzz of the month. And I think having some hard data from the musician community actually can better notate those trends on how they really affect the artist.
That's absolutely true, because we oftentimes, because we're in an environment now where there's a lot more data available, everything from SoundScan to, BDS, figuring out what's going on radio, to, the actual sort of data that comes from the music services like iTunes that CD Baby passes through to your members. I mean, there's tons of data out there, but oftentimes the assessment of what's going on is very top-down. Who's getting 1 million plays on YouTube or whatever. I mean, these are really big numbers, sometimes at the highest echelons of the music industry. We do need, as you said, data from masses, thousands of musicians, in order to sort of compile it from the bottom up, to see what does it look like from the individual musician's perspective, what array of revenue streams are they relying on, and how have those changed, especially in the past 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and especially because it seems like, someone comes out with the latest cool internet toy, whether it's a streaming service or some sort of music sharing gadget or whatever, and everyone gets really excited about it before they really think about some of the implications it may have, or if it's, even a good thing, how the music is being used that way. Because, the copyright laws with a lot of this are still a bit fuzzy, and it's seems like, whether it's a positive or negative for the music community is kind of the last thought.
That's exactly right. Yes. So we hope that artist revenue streams as a whole has an impact on how the public perceives and how they understand the complicated nature of being a creator in the 21st century. We hope that it sort of enriches the conversation that's happening without us. Without musicians, it's happening all the time on blog posts and everything. And we want to make sure that musicians, there's some rich data behind some of the conversations that are happening.
So you have on your website, by the way, people can go to futuremusic.org, and all the information about this project is there. But you have a list of the 29 streams that you guys refer to, and you've mentioned a few of the ways that artists are generating money, but I thought it'd be interesting to kind of go through some of the higher level groups that you have on your site and kind of explain what they are. Because for the average independent artist that, started writing songs, maybe he's recorded a couple albums and goes out and performs on their own, they may not be aware of a lot of these things, and especially, definitely, how the legislation might affect different aspects of what they kind of see as just their one singular career. They write, they record, they do everything, they go play, and not really seeing it as the little pieces of revenue stream where change can affect those things.
Sure. It's good for the purposes of the podcast is to think about it in 5 buckets. The first bucket being the money you make, the money that your musical composition makes. Maybe you're the songwriter or the composer. The thing that you write down on paper, the thing that you say, this is my musical composition, there's quite a few things that the musical composition can make money from. It can make money from mechanical royalties. If you sign, say, a publishing advance, you get money from that. You get money when it's played on the radio or on webcasts. Those are called public performance royalties that get passed through your performance rights organization, ASCAP, BMI, or CSAC in the States. You could also publish it as sheet music, make money that way. You could license it for a synchronization, which would be, being played in a TV show or a movie or something like that. There's quite a few composers that also work on commission so that they maybe compose something for a presenter or for a chamber music ensemble. Or they could be hired by a TV show or an ad agency to write a jingle. So that's composing kind of as composing for hire, basically. Mm-hmm. So that's one bucket. Then there's a second bucket, which is the money you could make from the sound recording. And this could be the thing you just wrote that's affixed as a CD or something in the studio, or it could be something that, say you just do covers. Say you covers. It's all just a sound recording. You've gone into the studio and you've made something. So the money you could make from that could be, you could be signed to a record label. You could get a big advance or a small advance. You could get support from the label for going on tour. You could make money from selling those sound recordings. In one of 3 different locations, you could sell physical CDs or vinyl. You could sell digital through iTunes and CD Baby. You could sell it at shows to your fans. Then there's money from that sound recording being streamed through a place like Rhapsody or Spotify. And you can get digital performance royalties. Those come through Sound Exchange to recording artists. That happens when your music is played on Pandora or other webcast stations or Sirius XM or other digital music services. Then there's also this sort of flip side of having it licensed for synchronizations or ringtones. It's called the master use license. It's like when they really want your sound recording, like the actual song, to be in a movie or something like that. So that's bucket number 2. Then bucket number 3 is the money that you could get from live performance. This is the one that most people recognize right away. Oh, I go play a show and they pay me a guarantee, or they pay me $100 at the door, whatever. So that's money you get for coming to play or perform live, whether it's your music or somebody else's. But it's important to remember that that for the most part, we all recognize how that works. But it also could include people who are salaried orchestra members who get paid for performing in a big orchestra hall. It could also include session musicians who can be paid to come to the studio and play or go out on the road and be the sideman for somebody else. So that's bucket number 3. Then bucket 4 is all the things you can make money on based on your brand or your persona. So this includes your T-shirts, your posters, your merchandise. Say you have an endorsement for a particular product, like say you use a particular type of drumsticks or a particular type of violin strings. You could get direct support from your fans. You could license your persona to video games, or you could create a clothing line or based around your brand or whatever. You could get honoraria for speaking. In essence, this is any income that you can get from leveraging your brand. So that's bucket 4. The fifth bucket is the money you could make just from your knowledge of your craft, like teaching or doing work related to passing along the knowledge of what you know about music or composing.
Yeah, and if you go to the website, you guys have it broken down even more, and it's pretty interesting to see all the different things listed there, and you start going, there is some things that I've forgotten about, and even some areas of opportunity that I think artists tend to overlook. Like you mentioned things like product endorsements, and people usually think, I'm not a mega selling artist. No one's going to give me any sort of revenue for that. But that's not necessarily the case. It might not be millions of dollars, but there's lots of opportunities where you can get a whole bunch of different little streams going that can really start to add up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and there's also this whole world of corporate sponsorship that it seems to be growing, where particular brands or lifestyle things, want to be associated with particular bands or particular genres of music. And it just depends on what your comfort level is in associating yourself with brands. But there is a growing amount of money available through that as well.
So when someone takes the survey, they're going to go through and fill in all this information about how they're making money, correct?
Yeah. We have tried to make it as easy as possible for musicians of all types to take this survey. And it might sound daunting given what we just talked about. Oh God, I don't know, 29 streams, that seems so complicated. But what we've done is sort of set it up so that you tell us first what you do. And then if you do participate in a particular revenue stream, you can answer questions related to that. And if you don't, we'll skip you right to the next thing. So you won't have to waste a lot of time in sections where it may not be relevant or pertain to what you do. But you'll see them. You'll see them, which is an interesting point about sort of taking the survey as a moment to educate yourself about the potential range of things out there. So the survey has a sort of ancillary benefit of being able to educate musicians about the scope of the things available to various artists and composers.
Are there certain types of artists you're looking for in order to take the survey, or is it just open across the board to anyone? The
minimum requirements are that you are a U.S. citizen or resident and at least 18 years of age or older. You might be interested in the first part, which is why we're just focusing on U.S. citizens, but it makes sense if you think about copyright law, because the entire framework under which most of the framework under which artists and composers make money in the United States is based on federal copyright law, which is slightly different in other countries. So this would be very difficult. It'd be much harder to make this work for, say, Canadian artists or European artists or anything like that, because their copyright laws just make some of the revenue streams slightly different, or sometimes radically different.
Yes, correct.
So because of the differences and because of FMC's capacity, we decided to just constrain it to United States artists with the hope that once we get through this stage, that it could become a model under which it's used in other countries, maybe tweaked slightly to make it related to their copyright laws, but tweaked so that it could be used to survey musicians in other countries, and then we could compare the data. So
what do you guys have planned to do with the data once it's all collected, the research is done? What do you have planned to do with it?
A few things. First of all, this survey is what is the biggest and the biggest piece of this research project, but I should mention that there's actually two other components to the methodology. One of them is we're doing in-person interviews with dozens of musicians. And like I mentioned earlier, we're trying to recognize the distinction between the different roles people play. So we've identified, say, songwriters who do not perform. We've identified orchestra players who play repertoire. And we've found individuals who match that musician type. And then we go interview them, and then we ask them for peer referrals. So we're using this thing called the snowball sample to find other candidates to interview. So part one of our methodology is these in-person interviews, which have, in fact, we've been doing for the past year and, in fact, informed a lot of how the survey was built. Because we learned so much in talking to, say, people who just compose for film and TV. It's like, I didn't know how it operated till I went and spoke to some folks who just do that work. So that's part one. And then another part of the methodology is these things called, we're doing financial case studies of particular artists. In the cases where where the artist is comfortable and trusts us and is organized, can show us what their financial records look like, so that we're able to develop like a revenue pie for each year. So it kind of visually breaks down what it looks like on a year-to-year basis. And if they have enough data, we look at a time series to show how things have changed over time. And we've done a handful of those, and we're sort of working through doing more of them. So the survey is this big other piece. So when we finally finish the survey, when the survey is open from September 6th until October 28th of 2011. Once the survey closes, it's going to take us some time to get through the data analysis. But what we hope to have is to be able to pull from what we've learned from the interviews, what we've understood from the case studies, and the big chunk of survey data, and figure out what are the emerging themes. How can we present this information not only to, the media, but also back to musicians? We want to make sure that musicians can have a sense of how they fit into the bigger picture of what's going on in sort of the creative world of the United States. And we hope that it provides musicians with a comprehensive analysis of how many different genres are being compensated in this digital age. And for us, we see this as a benchmark study. This is because it hasn't really been done before. There's certainly been some amazing work done on sort of particular genre levels. Since we're trying to be cross-genre, we want to make sure this is seen as a benchmark for understanding the shifting revenue streams for musicians.
So are you expecting that the research will probably be concluded early 2012? Is that when you're hoping to have it all wrapped up?
Yeah. Yep. We're sort of assuming that will be an okay timeline. Until we get the survey data back, it's kind of hard to really nail it down. But we're already planning for some presentations in the springtime of 2012 to hopefully have some stuff available for people to see it. I'm pretty confident that we'll be able to roll out stuff even in pieces, because there's going to be so much. We're not going to just issue one enormous report that's 300 pages, because I don't think a lot of people would read that. So we'll be making sure that it's visual, that it's very up on websites in small pieces, so that people can just sort of digest it in sort of manageable parts.
Yes, us artists appreciate that.
Yeah.
So do you have any sort of things that you personally are just kind of assumptions that you're kind of curious to see if they're true or not, or just things that you kind of think this is probably what's going to happen?
Well, I can tell you from the interviews we've done, which have been really fascinating, is that the things that I've heard from some musicians that are developing as themes are that technology is a double-edged sword, that it has been a remarkable and fascinating time in the past 10 years, this evolution from basically a kind of a physical sales method that was sort of had these traditional structures in it, to this sort of emerging digital world where artists have a lot closer access to their music fans if they really want it there. And then this huge explosion of services and platforms available for us to participate in, and also for music fans to engage with us through. So I think they see technology as a double-edged sword, because not only is there so much opportunity, but there's also just that many of the traditional structures have not survived well. And so musicians are now in this transition period where the things they used to rely on, maybe say physical sales or playing shows, may be changing around them. And so I think, and sometimes it's because of technology and this sort of tidal wave of technology that has sort of overcome most of the traditional model. So I think they see it as both things. So that's one thing. For me, one of the things I'm most interested in coming out of this big research project is being able to make a more informed case to the general public about the complex realities of being a musician in the current landscape. Because I do think that there are some assumptions out there that, all artists make money from touring, or everyone just sells T-shirts now, that I think are damaging to musicians, because it's an assumption that sometimes stops people from investing in music. Mm-hmm. So we just want to make sure, maybe it is true, but we don't know until we collect the data about what assumptions are true or not. So we want to make sure we keep an open mind in this process and collect some data so we're able to have an assessment of what it's like right now.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. I'm guilty of it myself, is just overgeneralizing certain aspects of the landscape of music, but when it comes down to it, the real nuts and bolts of what an artist needs to do in order to make money. For some people, it's may even be a different outcome for others, and that's what I think could be very interesting about this. And we kind of see that play out sometimes here at CD Baby.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, we'll be looking forward to the results. You guys will have to make sure you get in touch with us, and we'll talk about it on the podcast and get feedback from the artist community. Where can an artist go if they're interested in taking part of the project and filling out the questionnaire?
Anyone can go to futuremusic.org/ARS, which is a shortcut to the project's page. And from September 6th till October 28th, there will be a very visible link on that page to start the survey. So it's futuremusic.org/ARS, and you're welcome to take it, and we encourage you to not only take it, but also to tell all your music friends to take it.
All right. Well, we'll spread the word here at CD Baby, and I look forward to seeing the results. Kristin, I thank you for your time, and we'll, again, keep directing artists over to your site to check out the Artist Revenue Streams project, and we'll put a link on the podcast notes where they can link right to it and take the survey. So it should be September. This podcast will probably go up right around the start date, so it should be live. So I appreciate you taking time out of your day to speak with us.
Thank you, Kevin.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode. If you have the time, I would encourage you to head on over to the Future Music Coalition website. I'll put a link to it on the show notes for the podcast at cdbabypodcast.com. And head over to their site and take the survey. It'll be interesting to see what the results are. And, be honest. There's no reason to embellish the numbers. The more accurate the numbers, the better. I also want to let you know that it appears that we're having trouble with our listener call-in line. It was pointed out to us that the message was no longer working, and we stopped receiving your phone messages. So I set up a Google Voice account, and hopefully I'll have all this information updated on the website. But if not, write this number down, 360-524-2209. So go ahead and call that number. We'd love to get your thoughts or comments on today's podcast, or if you've got an interesting tip, music promotion tip to share, or a success story, feel free to call, and we'll play it on the show. You can also email us at info@cdbabypodcast.com, and that'll do it. We'll catch you next time. Bye. You've been listening to the CD Baby DIY Musician Podcast, broadcasting from Portland, Oregon, USA.